Mr. Speaker.
Jacinda Ardern.
Mr. Speaker, it is hard not to feel like the world at present is in political turmoil. Brexit, the rise in right-wing extreme movements, what I would describe as forms of fundamentalism, and I would include in that the rhetoric and the apparent popularity of Donald Trump in the United States. Mr. Speaker, we are seeing a rallying cry that is ultimately born out of fear, and it's born out of anger, and it's being fed half-truths and misinformation, and we should all be concerned about that. But none of us, even in this New Zealand Parliament, despite all of the differences between us and those other global counterparts, can afford to be complacent, particularly when you ask the question, where did all of this come from? Where did all of this international uncertainty, dissatisfaction come from? Well, in New Zealand, it will come from here. It will come from this graph. Now, this crude graph is a representation of almost anything we need to know about what is wrong with New Zealand right now. It is a representation of the inequality that exists here in New Zealand. This, Mr. Speaker, were the numbers released by Statistics New Zealand just this week. It shows what many of us in this House already know, but what the Minister of Finance today, right here, denied was even a problem. It shows, Maurice Williamson, that 10% of the population in New Zealand owns 60% of the wealth. 10% of the population in New Zealand owns 60% of the wealth. In contrast, the bottom 20% in New Zealand they owe more than what they own. And as far as distribution goes, if you want to put the final nail in the coffin for inequality in New Zealand, 40% of New Zealanders have 3% of the wealth, the bottom 40, of course. I fear that inequality as a turn of phrase gets bounced around, it's used in political rhetoric, it can sometimes lose its meaning, but behind those figures, behind that graph, sits people who ultimately have lost their hope. And my point, Mr. Speaker, is that what we're seeing internationally absolutely has the ability to happen here in some other form, has absolutely the ability to rise up and be fed by political misinformation. If the wrong lightning rod is given as to what the answer is to the question, how do we make change, how do we bring back that egalitarian society? Because, Mr. Speaker, the fact that this has even occurred in New Zealand is a marker of political failure. It's a failure to provide job security and decent wages. This is a result of a low-wage economy. It's a failure to provide secure, decent, affordable housing. This is the result of a government who doesn't believe in state housing, doesn't believe that that's a fundamental human right. It's a failure to provide decent, free, accessible education, or at least just a place where you're able to afford to bring up your family off the back of a 40-hour-a-week job. These were all at one time fundamentals of a New Zealand society. But I do want to offer a message of hope. There's a reason New Zealand doesn't have to experience the political turmoil of other countries. And that is because we do have the ability, through politics, through what often seems like this ugly beast, to make change. Let me give you an example. Child poverty in New Zealand is disgraceful, 305,000 children living in poverty. There have been 2 times in New Zealand's history where we've seen dramatic changes in those numbers. One was in the 1990s when child poverty spiked horrifically because the government brought in a black budget. The second time was when child poverty started to decline in New Zealand, and it was when Labour brought in working for families. Those 2 examples demonstrate that politics and policies and ideas matter. They make a difference for good or for evil, depending on what you choose. But the fact that we in this Parliament have the power to make change is a powerful tool. We should use it to give New Zealanders hope. We should use it to say to the next generation of voters and New Zealanders that actually some of those values that we in this Labour Party consider so dear, the fundamental idea from Norman Kirk that all anyone ever needs is something to do, somewhere to live, someone to love and something to hope for, rings as true today as it did then. And we should convince the members of public that in this place we can use that power for good and to turn this around.
Good speech.
The Honourable Nikki